August 4th, 1962, 10:47 p.m. Frank Sinatra's compound in Palm Springs, California. The phone rings in Frank's private office. He's alone, going through contracts for his upcoming Vegas shows. A glass of Jack Daniels on the desk, a cigarette burning in the ashtray. The desert night is quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a ringing telephone sound like an alarm. Frank picks up on the third ring. Yeah? The voice on the other end is slurred, frightened, barely recognizable, but Frank knows it immediately. He's heard that voice 1,000 times. In recording studios, at the Cal-Neva Lodge, at late-night parties where the champagne flowed and the laughter never stopped. But tonight, there's no laughter. Frank, they're going to kill me. You have to help me. It's Marilyn Monroe, and she's terrified. What Frank Sinatra heard in that phone call, what he knew about the events leading up to that night, and what he witnessed in the months before Marilyn's death would haunt him for the rest of his life. He never spoke about it publicly, never gave interviews, never confirmed or denied the rumors. But the people closest to him knew, the FBI knew. And now, decades after both of them are gone, the full story can finally be told. This is the untold story of Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and the phone call that changed everything. To understand what happened on August 4th, 1962, you have to go back 3 years earlier to the summer of 1959. That's when Frank Sinatra first introduced Marilyn Monroe to Senator John F. Kennedy at a party in Peter Lawford's beach house in Santa Monica. Peter was Frank's friend, a member of the Rat Pack, and also happened to be JFK's brother-in-law, married to Patricia Kennedy. The party was exclusive, maybe 20 people, politicians, actors, people with power and money, and secrets to protect. Frank was at the height of his influence. JFK was preparing his run for the presidency. And Marilyn, recently divorced from playwright Arthur Miller, was the biggest movie star in the world. Frank watched them meet. He saw the way JFK's eyes lit up when Marilyn walked into the room in a white dress that seemed to glow against her platinum blonde hair. He saw the way Marilyn smiled, shy but flirtatious, when JFK introduced himself. Frank thought he was doing his friend a favor, introducing a future president to a beautiful woman. What could go wrong? Everything. Within months, Marilyn and JFK were having an affair. Secret meetings at hotels, late-night phone calls, Marilyn flying to Washington under assumed names. The president's Secret Service detail looking the other way. And Frank, the man who introduced them, became the middleman, the fixer, the one who arranged meetings, provided alibis, kept secrets. At first, Frank didn't mind. This was how power worked in his world. You did favors for important people. They did favors for you. It was the currency of influence. But by 1961, things were getting complicated. The Cal-Neva Lodge sat on the border of California and Nevada, right on the shore of Lake Tahoe. Frank owned a percentage of it. It was the perfect location. Private. Isolated. The California-Nevada state line literally ran through the middle of the building. If you were in California, gambling was illegal. If you were in Nevada, anything was possible. Frank loved the place. He used it for private parties, secret meetings, romantic getaways. The celebrities who stayed there knew they could count on absolute discretion. In July 1962, just a month before Marilyn's death, she came to Cal-Neva for what would be her last visit. She was a wreck, physically and emotionally falling apart. Her career was in shambles. She'd just been fired from the film Something's Gotta Give for repeatedly missing days on set. The studio sued her for $500,000. She was broke, addicted to pills, drinking too much, sleeping too little. But worse than all of that, she'd been abandoned by the two men she thought loved her. JFK had cut off contact. His advisors especially his brother Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, warned him that the affair was too dangerous. Marilyn was unstable. She kept diaries. She talked too much when she drank. She was a security risk. So JFK ghosted her, stopped taking her calls, had his staff tell her he was unavailable. It devastated Marilyn. Then Robert Kennedy made a terrible mistake. He tried to handle the situation himself. RFK flew to Los Angeles multiple times in the summer of 1962 to personally tell Marilyn to stop calling, stop writing, stop trying to contact the president. But according to multiple witnesses, something happened during those visits. The relationship between Marilyn and Bobby Kennedy became romantic, or at least intimate. Now Marilyn was involved with both Kennedy brothers. And she was angry, hurt, betrayed. She started telling people she was going to hold a press conference. She was going to reveal everything: the affairs, the promises JFK made to leave Jackie, the pillow talk about Cuba, and the mob. This is when Frank started to worry. Frank had his own problems that summer. His gaming license at Cal-Neva was under investigation. The Nevada Gaming Control Board suspected he was letting mobsters use the lodge. Specifically, Sam Giancana, the boss of the Chicago outfit. The rumors were true. Giancana had been at Cal-Neva multiple times. He and Frank were friends, close friends. The kind of friendship that made the FBI nervous and the Kennedy administration furious. In fact, that July weekend when Marilyn came to Cal-Neva for the last time, Giancana was there too. Some witnesses claim they saw Marilyn, Frank, and Giancana having drinks together by the lake. Others say Marilyn spent most of the weekend in her cabin, barely coming out, popping pills and drinking vodka. What everyone agrees on is that something happened that weekend that left Marilyn even more distressed than when she arrived. There are photographs from that weekend. Marilyn looks terrible, bloated, disheveled, wearing sunglasses to hide her eyes. One photo shows her with visible bruises on her arms and legs. Officially, she fell. But some people who were there whispered that she'd been roughed up, maybe by Giancana's men, maybe as a warning to keep her mouth shut about the Kennedys. Frank saw it all. He was there. He knew Marilyn was in trouble. And according to his valet, George Jacobs, Frank tried to help her, tried to convince her to check into a hospital, to get clean, to stop threatening the Kennedys. But Marilyn was beyond reason. She felt betrayed by everyone: the Kennedys, the studio, even Frank, who she thought should have done more to protect her. She left Cal-Neva on July 29, 1962. Less than a week later, she'd be dead. The final week of Marilyn's life was chaos. She was living alone in her house in Brentwood, a small place by Hollywood standards, but hers. She'd bought it earlier that year, the first home she'd ever owned. She spent her days on the phone, calling friends, calling her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, calling Peter Lawford, trying to get messages to the Kennedys. She was desperate, erratic, sometimes incoherent. On August 3rd, the day before she died, Robert Kennedy reportedly came to her house. What happened during that visit is disputed. Some say he came to break things off permanently. Others say they had a screaming fight. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices. What's not disputed is that after RFK left, Marilyn made a series of phone calls. She called Peter Lawford, crying, saying goodbye. She called her psychiatrist, who came over and spent time with her, but left around 7 p.m. Then, at some point that evening, she called Frank Sinatra. Frank never publicly discussed that phone call. But people close to him, including his daughter Tina and his valet George Jacobs, said Frank talked about it in private. And what he said was haunting. According to those accounts, Marilyn called Frank sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. on August 4th. She was barely coherent, slurring her words. Frank thought she'd taken too many pills, which she often did, mixing barbiturates with champagne. But Marilyn wasn't calling to chat. She was terrified. "They're going to kill me, Frank. You have to help me." Frank tried to calm her down. "Nobody's going to kill you. You're just upset. Where are you?" "I'm home, but they're coming back. They're going to make it look like I did it myself." "Who's coming back? Who are you talking about?" Marilyn's response was garbled. She mentioned the Kennedys. She mentioned men in suits. She said something about her diary, about secrets that couldn't get out, about powerful people who wanted her silenced. Frank tried to keep her on the phone, tried to get her to calm down enough to make sense, but Marilyn was fading. The pills, the alcohol, the exhaustion. Her words became slower, more slurred. "I'm so tired, Frank. I just want to sleep." "Don't go to sleep yet. Let me send someone over there. Let me call your doctor. It's too late." And then she hung up. Frank immediately tried calling her back. The line was busy. He tried again, still busy. He called Peter Lawford and told him to get over to Marilyn's house right away, that something was wrong. But by the time anyone got there, it was too late. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom at approximately 3:30 a.m. on August 5, 1962. The official cause of death was ruled as acute barbiturate poisoning, likely from an overdose of nembutal and chloral hydrate. The official verdict was probable suicide, but Frank Sinatra never believed that. Neither did a lot of other people who knew Marilyn. The circumstances of her death were too suspicious. Too many inconsistencies in the timeline. Too many missing pieces. The housekeeper, Eunice Murray, changed her story multiple times about when she discovered the body. The doctor who was called to the scene, Dr. Greenson, also gave conflicting accounts. Marilyn's phone records from that night mysteriously disappeared. The ambulance driver who responded to the original call later claimed Marilyn was still alive when he arrived, but someone sent him away. And then there were the rumors that Robert Kennedy had been at Marilyn's house that evening, that men from the FBI or CIA or Secret Service had shown up to remove sensitive documents, that Marilyn's house had been wiped clean of evidence before the police arrived. Frank knew all of this. He heard the whispers. He saw how quickly the Kennedy administration moved to distance itself from the scandal, and he remembered that phone call. Marilyn's terrified voice, her certainty that someone was coming to kill her. What made it worse for Frank was the guilt. He was the one who introduced Marilyn to JFK. He was the one who facilitated their affair. He was the one who brought her to Cal-Neva that final weekend, where something traumatic happened that pushed her over the edge. Frank Sinatra carried that weight for the rest of his life. In the days after Marilyn's death, Frank retreated from public view. He canceled shows. He refused interviews. The FBI opened an investigation, not into Marilyn's death directly, but into whether organized crime figures like Sam Giancana had been involved. Frank was questioned. He told the FBI nothing, claimed he barely knew Marilyn, said they'd met at parties but weren't close. The FBI knew he was lying, but they couldn't prove anything. Meanwhile, Frank's relationship with the Kennedys shattered completely. He'd already been cut off after JFK canceled a planned visit to Frank's Palm Springs compound in 1962, choosing to stay at Bing Crosby's house instead. The reason was obvious. Robert Kennedy didn't want the president associated with someone who had mob ties. But after Marilyn's death, Frank became radioactive. The Kennedys wanted nothing to do with him. Peter Lawford, caught in the middle, was kicked out of the Rat Pack. Frank never forgave him, believing Peter should have done more to help Marilyn that last night. By 1963, Frank's Nevada gaming license was revoked because of his association with Sam Giancana. Everything Frank had built in Vegas was threatened. His casinos, his show, his power base. all because he'd gotten too close to people like the Kennedys and Giancana. And through it all, Frank kept quiet about Marilyn, refused to discuss her publicly, refused to fuel the conspiracy theories or the gossip columns. But privately, according to those who knew him, Frank was haunted. Years later, when Frank's daughter Tina asked him about Marilyn, he finally opened up, just a little. He told her that Marilyn was troubled but genuine, that she'd been used by powerful men who should have protected her, that Hollywood chewed up women like Marilyn and spit them out when they were no longer useful. He admitted he felt guilty. Not for introducing her to JFK exactly, but for not doing more to help her when she was spiraling, for not insisting she get real help, for not recognizing how serious things had become. Tina asked him about the conspiracy theories. Did he think Marilyn was murdered? Frank's answer was carefully worded. He said that in his experience, powerful people protecting powerful secrets were capable of anything. He said that Marilyn knew too much and talked too much, and that made her dangerous. He said that whether she took those pills herself or someone gave them to her, the result was the same. The people who should have cared for her let her die. Then he said something that Tina never forgot. Some phone calls you never forget, some voices you hear even after they're gone. The FBI files on Frank Sinatra, partially declassified in the 1990s and 2000s, reveal that the Bureau believed Frank knew more about Marilyn's death than he ever admitted. They suspected he'd been in contact with both Marilyn and Sam Giancana in the days before her death. They believed Giancana might have ordered Marilyn's death to protect the Kennedys, whom the mob had helped get elected. The theory was dark. The mob had dirt on JFK through their connection to Marilyn. If she went public, it would destroy the Kennedy presidency. And if the Kennedy presidency fell, the mob lost their protection. So Marilyn had to be silenced. Frank, in this theory, was the middleman again. Not the killer, but someone who knew what was coming and couldn't stop it. Whether that's true, we'll probably never know for certain. Frank took the full story to his grave when he died in 1998, 36 years after Marilyn's death. But we know this much. Frank Sinatra got a phone call from Marilyn Monroe on August 4, 1962. She was terrified. She asked for help, and within hours, she was dead. That phone call haunted Frank for the rest of his life. And maybe it should have, because Marilyn was right to be scared. Whether she died by her own hand or someone else's, she died because she knew too much, loved the wrong people, and trusted men who were more interested in protecting themselves than protecting her. Frank Sinatra outlived almost everyone connected to that story. JFK was assassinated in 1963. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. Sam Giancana was murdered in 1975, shot in the back of the head in his own home. Peter Lawford drank himself to death in 1984. Frank watched them all die, and he kept quiet, kept the secrets, kept his mouth shut about what he knew. Why? Maybe out of loyalty to the Kennedys, despite everything. Maybe out of self-preservation. Maybe because he knew that talking about Marilyn's death would only bring more scrutiny to his own connections with organized crime and powerful politicians. Or maybe because some things are too painful to discuss. Some guilt runs too deep. Some voices once heard never stop echoing. In 1985, Frank Sinatra received the Medal of Freedom from President Ronald Reagan. During his acceptance speech, he talked about his long career, his love of country, his pride in being American. But he didn't mention Marilyn Monroe. He never did. The woman who called him at 3 a.m., terrified and alone, asking for help he couldn't or wouldn't give, remained a silence in Frank's public life. But in his private life, according to those who knew him best, Marilyn was always there, a ghost, a regret, A reminder that for all his power and influence, there are some people you can't save and some phone calls you can never forget. Today, more than 60 years after Marilyn Monroe's death, the truth about what really happened remains elusive. The official story is suicide. The conspiracy theories range from plausible to absurd. But one thing is undeniable. Frank Sinatra was there. He knew the major players. He witnessed the affairs, the cover-ups, the panic when Marilyn threatened to go public. He got that phone call on August 4th, 1962. And he chose silence. Whether that makes him complicit, protective, or simply powerless against forces bigger than himself is something history still debates. What we know for certain is this: Marilyn Monroe died alone in her bedroom at age 36, surrounded by pill bottles and secrets. Frank Sinatra lived another 36 years, surrounded by wealth and fame and applause. But according to his daughter Tina, late at night when the shows were over and the crowds went home, Frank would sometimes sit in his study with a glass of Jack Daniels and stare at nothing. And Tina believed he was hearing that voice again. That slurred, frightened voice from August 4th, 1962. "They're going to kill me, Frank. You have to help me." He didn't help her, or couldn't, or wouldn't. And that phone call changed everything. And that phone call changed everything. What we know for certain is this: Marilyn Monroe died alone in her bedroom at age 36, surrounded by pill bottles and secrets. Frank Sinatra lived another 36 years, surrounded by wealth and fame and applause. But according to those closest to him, he never forgot Marilyn. His daughter Tina wrote in her memoir that Frank carried deep guilt about Marilyn's death, not because he caused it, but because he felt he should have done more to help her. He felt he'd enabled a toxic situation by introducing her to the Kennedys. He felt he'd failed to protect her when she needed protection most. Tina recalled that late at night, when the shows were over and the crowds went home, Frank would sometimes sit alone in his study with a glass of Jack Daniels, lost in thought. When she asked what was on his mind, he'd just shake his head and say, "Old ghosts." Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, at age 82, surrounded by his family. By then, almost everyone connected to that summer of 1962 was gone. JFK assassinated. Bobby Kennedy assassinated. Sam Giancana murdered. Peter Lawford dead from years of drinking. Frank outlived them all. But he never spoke publicly about what happened to Marilyn Monroe, never gave interviews about that period, never confirmed or denied the rumors. The secrets died with him. Whether he received a phone call from Marilyn on August 4th, 1962, we may never know for certain. The evidence is circumstantial. The witnesses are gone. The truth is buried with all of them. But what we do know is this: Frank Sinatra introduced Marilyn Monroe to John F. Kennedy. He watched as their affair spiraled out of control. He was there during her final chaotic summer, and whatever he knew, whatever he witnessed, whatever guilt he carried, he took it to his grave. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with silence. And maybe that silence tells us everything we need to know.